Look inside the bag. I can't go on the field trip I was looking forward to.
About 14 minutes after sending off Emily for the field trip, she returned home and bursted into tears, saying this. Shortly after Emily left for the field trip, I got a call from her homeroom teacher. I got very nervous when I was told something happened to Emily, and it was an emergency. Emily came home 5 minutes after the call, like the teacher told me. The teacher told me that the reason for her return is inside her backpack, so I checked inside, and there was brand new clothes all wet and dirty. I heard that Sarah, my mother-in-law, came and did that. I hate to say it, but my relationship with Sarah was not going well, and she is not very fond of Emily either. There was no way she would go to school just to send her off for the field trip. I immediately called Sarah furiously, demanding an explanation. Then Sarah argued that it was unfair for only Emily, one of her 2 granddaughters, to go on the field trip, implying the other granddaughter would feel left out. Sarah defiantly claimed she had done nothing wrong, merely enforced justice on Emily, and then she abruptly ended the call. Fuming with anger, I reported the incident to someone, and as a result, Sarah faced ruinous consequences for crossing that person. I am a stay-at-home mom in my 30s. My husband, around the same age as me, and I have one daughter, Emily. Now in 6th grade, she had been looking forward to this school trip for quite some time. Emily has been doing rhythmic gymnastics in kindergarten and sometimes demonstrates her skills during gym class. Her participation in competitions has even been featured in the local newspaper, making her popular at this school. There is an annual gym class where students present their own creative mat exercises. Kids from other classes even come to see her perform. That is how much popular she is. Emily has grown up without arrogance or boastfulness, always willing to spend time helping and advising her friends when asked. Although I was lucky enough to marry to someone I loved, our marriage did not go smooth from the beginning. That is not because of my husband, but because of Sarah. She felt that I took her beloved son away from her. Initially, Sarah demanded that she will accept our marriage only if we live with her. My husband moved out of home when he went to college, and I was in a similar situation, so we decided to live on our own, not with either of our parents. Of course, we would discuss living with our parents whenever there is a need for nursing care for either of our parents. We told Sarah this was our stance and cannot decided to live together for right now. We could have outright refused, but we feared it would upset Sarah and worsen our relationship. That's when Bob, my father-in-law, said, "It's too much to ask the young couple to live with the in-laws. Let them have a few years on their own." He threw us a lifeline. My husband then managed to persuade Sarah, and the discussion to live together ended at that time. However, after we got married, Sarah frequently brought up the idea of living together. Normally, if she wanted us to live together, one would expect her to at least be pleasant to me, but she did the opposite.
A young woman not working and just being a stay-at-home mom, you've got it easy. When I was your age, I had to work part-time to help with the family finances. Your housekeeping must be perfect then, right? So, what's with this mess?
She would come over to nitpick and criticize whenever my husband was not home. When my husband is on business trip for a few days, she would stay over saying it is dangerous to go home late at night, leaving me to deal with her snide remarks entire time. I had a slight mental breakdown, and when my husband realized it was because of his mother's excessive meddling, he firmly told her that we would never live together. Thanks to my husband and Bob keeping her at bay, my condition improved, and I soon found out I was pregnant. I was anxious about further interference from Sarah, but she became preoccupied with my husband's older sister Sophie, who was also pregnant at the time, and showed no interest in me. She was indifferent about my labor, sticking close to Sophie, and while she celebrated Sophie's childbirth grandly, she practically forgot about ours. Years passed, and life went on peacefully. Emily has grown up to be an honest, strong, and sincere child. Sarah believed that her inability to live with her precious son was because I was manipulating and controlling him. Since my grown daughter resembled me more than her father, when we inevitably faced Sarah at family gatherings, she would give cold shoulder to Emily. Conversely, Sophie's daughter, my niece, was the spitting image of Sophie when she was a child, and Sarah was very fond of her. At Christmas time, Sarah gave presents to my niece, but never to Emily. Bob would secretly give presents to Emily, but if Sarah found out, she would snatch them away, saying,
I have nothing to give to the child of the woman who stole my son.
When Bob or my husband would object, saying, "Is that something to say in front of the kids?" Sarah would dramatically claim they were all ganging up on her. Gradually, Emily came to realize that Sarah disliked her. Still, she never became bitter, and I am incredibly grateful for how she has grown. Just before Emily graduated from kindergarten, Sophie got divorced and took custody of her daughter. They moved into Sarah and Bob's house, which was in my daughter's school district. So my niece started to go to the same elementary school as Emily. They are in the same grade, but in different classes, yet my niece frequently sees Emily at school. She often borrows school supplies and personal items that each student is required to have from Emily. I got to know about this when I noticed Emily's stationery goods seems to be used so much and running out quickly, so I asked her the reason of that. Initially, I suspected it might be due to bullying, perhaps her things were being hidden or thrown away, but that wasn't the case. Naturally, sharing items between two people would lead to quicker usage. Finding out it wasn't bullying was a relief, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Wondering if this was another form of harassment from my Sophie. Given that Sarah disliked me and Emily and was consistently petty, it wasn't unusual for Sophie to make snide remarks too. Especially after she divorced and moved back into the in-laws' home, she called me and sent me messages just to throw jabs at me, like saying,
"A plain Jane like you doesn't deserve to be married to my brother. You're bound to be dumped eventually."
She seemed to think of herself as quite capable woman, implying that if she could fail in marriage, I was definitely headed for the same fate. I got annoyed, but I guessed she was just bitter because our family appeared happy, so I tried to let it slide. However, the thought of her targeting Emily was something I didn't want to contemplate, telling myself I might be reading too much into it. But this judgment would lead to unexpected consequences later on, which I would only realize in time. As time passed, Emily reached the 6th grade, the year of the much-anticipated field trip. She had been excited whenever she took the trip fee to school, and now it was finally the year for her to experience it. About the field trip, like where they would go, became the frequent topics of our conversation. She was curious about how it was when me and my husband went on the trip when we were students, asking about the schedule and locations as they were being decided. When Emily brought home a notice from school asking for preparations for the trip, we slowly started getting ready for it. While she was thrilled, I was a bit worried. There had been a recent incident in her class that resulted in parents being called in. Emily often remarked, "Why are boys in my class so childish?" expressing her concerns about the rowdy behavior of some boys. Being in the 6th grade, it's a time when girls start to experience physical changes, and some who develop early begin wearing training bras around 4th grade. Emily, active in gymnastics, had a muscular build and wasn't particularly mature in appearance yet. But the field trip guide for parents mentioned and advised to care about underwear even if staying in separate rooms from the boys. The guide also advised to train to wearing bras if not already. It also mentioned about period 2. Since letters intended for parents often pass through the children's hands, it's inevitable some kids read them out of curiosity. It seems that some mischievous boys reacted to words like period and bra, teasing and harassing the girls. I had already educated Emily about the physical changes she would undergo at a certain age. Even before the school sent home notes about undergarments, her rhythmic gymnastics club had discussed these topics. As their outfits tend to reveal body lines, and care for growing girls was included in their discussions. I taught Emily that growth is personal, and it's not right to tease others about their developing bodies. My justice-minded daughter stood up for the teased girls, calling out the boys' bad behavior. One of the boys, son of a city councilman, complained to his father about a sassy girl challenging boys. Parents of the boys' friends also got involved, causing a commotion at school, demanding a meeting with the girls' parents. However, the issue of targeting physically developing girls had already been a concern, so the boys' parents' arguments were dismissed. The harassed girls' parents took a firm stand, threatening to report to the education board, leading the school to adopt a strict stance against the boys and their parents. Emily gained popularity as a heroic figure among the girls. Yet, away from parental supervision, kids can sometimes engage in cruel acts. I was anxious about potential retaliation from the boys' group. Though teachers, including the homeroom teacher, assured they would keep watch, my concern lingered. Contrary to my worries, Emily seemed unconcerned, treating the incident as a thing of the past. We went shopping for the things she needs at the school trip several times. Due to her rhythmic gymnastics schedule. One time when we were shopping, I unexpectedly ran into Sophie. Initially, I thought I could manage if it was just her, but then Sarah was also there inside the store. Sophie had came out earlier because she got bored while Sarah had some chats with a lady at the store. A few minutes later, Sarah came out too.
We met at just the right time. Emily is taking rhythmic gymnastics and has become quite popular in her class, hasn't she?
I can't stand to see my granddaughters treated differently. As a grandmother, I want my granddaughter to join the same gymnastics club as your daughter.
But we're single-parent family, right? Without a breadwinner husband. Naturally, you should cover the lesson fee.
She even demanded that I provide transportation. When I flatly refused, she claimed Emily had been bragging to my niece.
It must be your snobby daughter boasting to my granddaughter in the other class.
Don't belittle us just because we're a single parent, laughing as if to say, you can't afford after-school activities without a father, right? What kind of mother are you to raise her to say that?
They said that they were deeply hurt by Emily's alleged insensitive behavior and words. They said to consider the gymnastics club fees and transportation as apology. Emily denied saying such things, but Sarah shouted that children shouldn't butt into adult conversations. Emily gripped my hand tightly, enduring their unreasonable demands. I couldn't let them win while Emily was holding up. I stated that any decision would be made with my husband and that I believed in Emily, who would never say such things. I promised to hear both sides, including my nieces, before making any decisions, announcing that my husband and I would meet with my niece. Sarah and Sophie didn't want my husband to join, so stopped talking. We left and went home at that timing. After we got home, I hugged Emily tightly. I'm sorry for making you feel bad. Sorry you had to go through this because of me. I repeated many times. Emily reassured me it wasn't my fault, but I knew deep down it stemmed from my rocky relationship with Sarah. Regardless of her insensitive behavior. When my husband came home, I reported everything that happened. My husband informed Bob about the situation, and he made sure he will watch out for the behavior of Sarah, Sophie, and her daughter. But soon I come to realize that Sarah and Sophie were not the type to back down easily. Despite the challenges, the day Emily had been eagerly anticipating, her school trip, finally came. Even though we checked her packing list multiple times the night before, I couldn't help asking, "Did you forget anything?" Out of habit, as I always send her off to school. She laughed and said, "We checked everything together, Mom. I'm all set," and left the house with a spring in her step. It's only a 5-minute walk to the school. She would travel by chartered bus, stopping at rest areas along the way to the destination. While doing housework, I kept glancing at the clock, wondering if she had boarded the bus yet and if it had departed on time. I pondered if my mother felt the same way after sending me off on my school trip when I was her age, oblivious and having fun with my friends. Then, unexpectedly, phone rang around 40 minutes after Emily left. It was her homeroom teacher on the line. Hearing something unexpected has happened. My heart raced, fearing an accident. However, listening to the teacher's relatively calm voice, I understood the situation. Due to certain circumstances, Emily needed to return home, but if we could quickly exchange some items and drive her to a specified station, she could rejoin the bus trip. I thanked the teacher for her considerate arrangement and hung up, then scrambled to find suitable replacements for the packed items. When Emily returned home crying, I was somewhat prepared. She looked different from what the teacher described. She had left home bright and cheerful just 40 minutes earlier. Now, she was in tears. I asked what happened, and she said I would understand if I looked in her backpack. When I checked, I found the inside slightly damp, not enough to leak through. The backpack was originally waterproof, but as a precaution, my husband had also sprayed the inside with waterproofing spray, knowing the unpredictable nature of children's belongings. Fortunately, only the inside of the backpack was wet, and the waterproofing prevented the liquid from seeping through, affecting only the non-waterproof items. While crying, Emily explained that Sarah had come to see her granddaughter off and poured juice into her backpack. Emily was aware that her grandmother didn't like her and assumed she had come for her cousin's send-off, not hers. Engrossed in conversation with her friends, she didn't notice her grandmother behind her, until a friend alerted her that an unknown elderly woman was tampering with her backpack. By the time she turned around, something had already been poured into it, and the inside was wet. She naturally confronted her grandmother, who brushed it off as an accidental spill and walked away. I assured Emily I would handle it and encouraged her to focus on enjoying her school trip. I prepared a smaller backpack for her, filling it with replacements and new clothes I had bought as spares. Emily, having regained her composure, helped eagerly with the packing, and we quickly drove to the designated station. It seemed the bus had gotten slightly caught in traffic, so we arrived earlier. Though the bus was only supposed to pass by the station, they made a special stop for Emily, for which I was grateful. Greeted by her friends, she boarded the bus and waved to me several times as she set off on her school trip. I watched until the bus was out of sight, then returned home. Before tackling the remaining household chores, I called Sarah to protest. Knowing getting emotional would play into her hands, I resolved to stay calm and collected. I took several deep breaths before calling her. After 2 rings, Sarah answered. I protested why she put an unfinished drink in Emily's backpack.
Isn't it sad that only one of my granddaughters could go on the trip? I thought you wouldn't listen, so I wet the belongings to stop your daughter from going. Isn't it due to your lack of consideration?
What is this woman saying? Frustrated as I was, I knew calling her names would mean losing, so I tried to respond calmly. However, Sarah unilaterally ended the call, claiming she had to leave. I wasn't even aware that my niece couldn't go on the trip. I had been avoiding any contact with Sarah and Sophie. How could I have known? I hadn't heard anything about my niece not being able to go on the trip from Emily either. There was no news of illness or injury, and even though my relationship with my Sophie is strained, any significant health issue involving my niece would have reached my husband's ears. He would have shared that information with me, at least for the sake of keeping me informed. My anger was still boiling when I received a call from my niece. She admitted feeling envious seeing how much Emily was looking forward to the trip, and had expressed a desire to her mother and grandmother to join her classmates on the trip. However, my niece was told by her mother that she couldn't go because they hadn't saved up for it. Sarah, after hearing this, remarked the night before that it would be too sad for my niece to see Emily enjoying the trip and gloating, suggesting she deserved to experience some hardship. My niece apologized, saying she hadn't realized the actual situation until it was too late. The trip savings were supposed to be handed in monthly, just like the lunch fees, in an envelope by the children. I wonder if my niece ever found it odd not seeing others hand in their savings to the teacher. This question was quickly resolved. Sophie had told my niece that the trip was fully paid for, so there was no need to contribute monthly. My niece believed this, but as the trip approached, she was confronted with the reality that no savings had been made. How cruel of Sophie to do such a thing. There are also various reasons why some children in Emily's class do not go on the trip. When I was a child, there were students who couldn't participate in school events due to illness or other reasons. That's why I've told Emily not to ask others why they are not going on such trips. I assume my niece's teacher, thinking it best, didn't pursue the unpaid fees, respecting the family's circumstances. If there had been any questioning, my niece would have surely asked her mother, and if it became a big issue, Bob, who lives with them, would have noticed. I couldn't stand the thought of Sophie forcing sacrifices on my niece. I had avoided her until now, but this time I couldn't just walk away. Out of consideration for my niece, who apologized during her grandmother's absence, I felt compelled to make Sophie realize her wrongdoing. I reassured my niece that this was not her burden to bear, and that it was an adult issue she shouldn't blame herself for. That evening, after my husband came home from work, I apologized for discussing it while he was tired, then reported the day's events. He immediately contacted my Bob to share what had happened. Bob, still in his late 50s and working like my husband, expressed regret for not noticing the issue with the school trip earlier and apologized. He was quite surprised to learn that no savings had been made for the trip. My husband was also furious that Sarah actually went to our daughter's school to cause trouble. He regretted that he could have arranged to drop our daughter off at school himself. He apologized, thinking that if he had been there for the send-off, he might have prevented her misconduct. No one could have expected that Sarah, who had never participated in school events before, would attend this school trip send-off. It ended up being an unresolved situation. But the battle wasn't over for Bob yet. After finishing the conversation with us, it seems that he woke up Sarah and Sophie to lecture them. This lecture happened late at night, spanning into the early hours, and as a result, Susan and Linda called us before dawn, venting their frustration.
How does it feel to be woken up because you tattled to Dad? Mom and I got an earful from him.
Can't deal with chores on so little sleep, so you come over here and make breakfast. It's only fair since you played the righteous one and snitched to your husband, right? Such a poor daughter-in-law you are.
However, I, having answered the phone simply because it rang, ignored the complaints of Sarah and Sophie and went back to sleep. It seems I must have given non-committal responses because Sarah believed I would come to prepare breakfast, and thus she didn't bother preparing anything for Bob. Then I hear she rushed to make breakfast, getting yelled from Bob, was the lecture insufficient? The rushed meal resulted in overly salty scrambled eggs, and my Bob remarked that a wife who can't even make decent scrambled eggs and only sows discord is useless, hinting at something close to a divorce declaration. My husband said that this time it seemed to have really hit Sarah hard, and he thought she would calm down for a while. I wished that she really would calm down. Given the many times Sarah has caused trouble, would a mere hint at divorce calm her down? But indeed, just like my husband said, there were no more snide calls from Sarah or Sophie, and we had peaceful days, during which our daughter, Emily, came back from her field trip. Emily couldn't stop talking about the trip, and at dinner, I had to remind her to either eat or talk. She joyfully recounted her field trip adventures with gestures and expressions, right up until bedtime. There was a set amount for spending money, and though she could have just bought what she wanted, she brought back souvenirs for us. She even got something for her cousin who couldn't go on the trip. Emily noticed her cousin wasn't in class and asked why she was absent. The absence was due to unpaid field trip fees, but the teacher just said she suddenly got sick. Upon hearing this, Emily bought matching keychains in different colors. I told Emily, she said she was feeling better and could go to school. I've taught Emily that lying is bad, but I also want to teach her that sometimes there are kind lies meant to help others. A few days later, we were called by the Bob for a discussion. The matter of the cousin's missed field trip was uncovered, leading him to contact the Sophie's ex-husband. He was unaware of the divorce reason, preferring to stay out of their marital issues. However, if Sophie and Emily were struggling financially to the extent of not affording the field trip, he wondered if the ex-husband could provide some child support. But the truth told by the ex-husband was different. The divorce was due to the Sophie's excessive spending. Feeling overwhelmed with her inadequate parenting and household management, the ex-husband intended to take custody of the daughter. But Sophie stubbornly refused to let go of Emily, leading to a divorce agreement where she kept the custody. The ex-husband desperately wanted the divorce and had been paying the agreed child support monthly. He also covered lunch fees and field trip costs separately. So, when he found out about the unpaid field trip fee and his daughter missing the trip, his frustration and anger were immense. Interestingly, Bob was also concerned about the niece lacking school supplies and using worn-out stationery, and he was giving money to Sarah to buy new ones. But Sarah ended up spending it on outings with Sophie. Sophie squandered the child support from her ex-husband on herself, never using it for her niece. Bob asked how the niece was managing without school supplies, and it turned out she was told to borrow from Emily. This revelation explained a lot. I had noticed Emily's pencil case getting empty more frequently. While she said it was because she and her cousin were using the supplies together, it's possible she was actually giving them away. After repeatedly being asked to borrow stationery, she might have just decided to give it away, even if it was just a pencil. Bob, upon learning the true nature of the Sarah and Sophie and their misuse of child support and neglect of school participation, realized the negative impact of their influence. He then confirmed with the Sophie's ex-husband if he was still willing to take custody of the niece and encouraged him to pursue a custody battle. Although such matters are usually settled through discussion, if one party stubbornly refuses, it automatically goes to court. Sophie, not wanting to lose the child support, resisted, leading to a lawsuit. Considering the family environment and the Sophie's lack of income, it was deemed impossible for her to raise the child. After the divorce, she neither worked nor lived independently, relying on the financial support from her father and squandering the child support on leisure. The custody battle was swiftly resolved in court, and the niece was taken in by her father, who had returned to his parents' home. She will now live without oppression, supported by her paternal grandparents. After losing the case easily, Sophie, accompanied by Sarah, came to my place, screaming,
"How dare you interfere? Now you have to give me an allowance."
He was a good cash cow. Ever since you married my son, it's been one misfortune after another, a jinx.
They started yelling early in the morning, ignoring my husband's attempts to stop them, and began rummaging for valuables. So I immediately sought help from Bob. Bob came over in a fury, apologized profusely to me and my husband, then shoved the Sarah and Sophie into the car and took them away. Days later, with no more disposable income, Sophie and Sarah, without a hint of remorse, just claimed they were seeking a bit of fun and thrill when they were caught taking unpaid items from a local supermarket and handed over to the police. Not wanting to ask us for help, they called Bob at work to bail them out, causing a disruption in his job. Frustrated by their actions and now police involvement, Bob divorced Sarah. He left the house to them, and since he was very fond of Emily, he decided to move in with us. Sarah took as much as she could in the divorce settlement and, despite having a house, squandered her finances without considering the loss of Bob's income. Soon, they couldn't even afford basic utilities or food. And she came crying to me for forgiveness, asking to live together as a family. They come saying, "Let's all live together peacefully." But what peace can there be? Wasn't it them who trampled on my efforts to live harmoniously? Don't they think of getting a job to earn money to eat? I ousted them from the house because I won't shelter those who make no effort to be independent. They knocked on the door for a while, but after neighbors called the police, they received a warning. Having been interrogated by the police once, they seemed to realize that getting caught again would be serious and finally left. Since then, they haven't come begging to us, but it appears they've incurred substantial debt from shady sources and are avoiding work to repay it. Their former home is now plastered with demands for repayment, and while it once echoed with loud, angry voices, I hear it's now quiet with no sign of the Sarah and Sophie. Where they are or what they're doing, I neither know or care. My niece was taken in by her father and transferred school. But she and Emily have exchanged contact information and are now pen pals. They seem happy chatting on the phone occasionally. My husband and the niece's father have now found common ground, exchanging emails about parenting. They're discussing to plan a short trip to bring the girls together. I can only hope for a bright future for both my niece and daughter.